The story begins with a man waiting by a pickup truck in the darkness. Another man approaches and confirms the target. It's definitely him. They discuss the transaction. 300 pounds for a gun. The weapon is in the glove box, but there are only 3 bullets. The buyer questions this. How many does he need? They get in the vehicle and drive through the night. The driver asks, where has he been all this time? The passenger answers with a single word, hell. They arrive at a house and the passenger steps out. But something goes terribly wrong. The man curses loudly and rushes back to the vehicle. The driver speeds away as flames rise in the distance behind them. That same evening, a young boy named Ollie is having the time of his life at the fair. He tells his family it was the best night ever. When he grows up, he announces with absolute certainty he's definitely going to work at the fair, 180%. His family smiles at his enthusiasm as they enjoy the festivities together. Later that night, around 2 in the morning, Ollie's mother Cheryl calls out for him. Suddenly, her voice turns to screams. A man has broken into their home. Ollie is bound and helpless. The intruder is Bull, a man who was supposed to be dead. Bull asks where Gemma is. Cheryl is terrified, insists she hasn't seen her. She hasn't seen any of them. Her voice cracks with fear as she tries to convince him. Bull tells her that Norm knows what happened. Her family knows the truth, but Cheryl claims no one talks to her anymore. He demands information about Aiden, his son. Cheryl screams that she doesn't know. It's been years since she had any contact with them. Bull's patience runs out. He becomes violent, and Cheryl's screams fill the house. Before the night ends, both Cheryl and Ollie are dead, victims of Bull's relentless quest for answers. The next morning, a man named Jim makes a difficult phone call to Gary. He delivers the terrible news. Ollie and Cheryl have been killed, butchered in their own home. Gary is stunned, asking how this happened. Jim explains they were murdered, but he refuses to be the one to tell Norm. That responsibility falls to Gary. Gary arrives at Norm's residence where family members have gathered. The atmosphere is tense. Someone points out that Cheryl was never involved in anything criminal. She was innocent. Gary suggests it might have been a robbery gone wrong. It could be anything. But deep down, everyone senses this is something more sinister. Another family member argues that Cheryl shouldn't have moved away. If she had stayed close, they could have protected her. Gary questions this logic. Protect her from what? They just said she wasn't mixed up in anything. The conversation grows heated. Cheryl made her own choices, Gary reminds them. Norm's rage builds. He reminds Gary to watch what he's saying. It's his blood that was spilled. Gary tries to defend his position, but the tension in the room is suffocating. Finally, Gary delivers the news to Norm directly. Cheryl is dead. And Ollie too. Norm states flatly that he doesn't give a damn about Ollie. He only wants to know why this happened. Meanwhile, Bull continues his mission. He approaches a youth center where a teenage boy named Adam is standing outside. Bull asks if he's Marco's boy. Adam confirms he is. Bull instructs him to go home and tell his father that Bull is here. The boy hesitates but eventually agrees to deliver the message. At Marco's house, the family is in crisis mode. Adam has just told his father about encountering Bull. Marco's wife questions why Bull would be at the youth center after being gone for 10 years. Marco admits he doesn't know. He tells his wife he'll have to investigate. She immediately protests, telling Marco he needs to stay out of it. She insists it can't possibly be Bull because he's gone. Marco grows increasingly anxious. He picks up the phone and calls Norm to report the situation. He warns him that Adam claims to have seen Bull. Norm listens carefully, then delivers shocking news. It's Ollie and Cheryl. They're dead, both murdered. Marco is stunned into silence. Norm's voice is grave as he confirms the details. Marco tells Norm he's heading out immediately to investigate. Marco arms himself with a knife before leaving. He instructs his wife to lock all the doors and windows. No one leaves the house until he returns. That night, Marco arrives at the youth center. He steps into the darkness and calls out Bull's name. When he sees the figure emerge from the shadows, Marco is genuinely shocked. He doesn't understand how this is even possible. How can Bull be here? Bull responds that he doesn't understand it either. The confrontation is tense. Bull makes his position clear. If Marco doesn't tell him what happened to Aiden, he's going to make Marco eat the little knife he's holding. Marco immediately apologizes, his voice shaking. He was just doing what he was told. Back at Marco's house, his wife Diane grows increasingly worried. She tries calling her husband repeatedly. Someone answers. It's not Marco's voice. It's Bull speaking. Bull asks her to pass on a message. Tell Norm, Gary, and the others that he's coming. He's coming for all of them. Diane asks where Marco is, her voice rising in panic. Bull doesn't answer directly. She discovers her husband's body. The film flashes back 10 years to show Bull's previous life. He's at a family gathering with Norm and others. Bull is playing with his young son Aiden, spraying him with water. Norm watches them carefully from a distance. Later, Norm pulls Bull aside for a private conversation. He asks Bull directly if he's been fooling around with anyone. Like a woman, he clarifies. Bull is offended by the question. He asks if Gemma told Norm. Something. She's a liar if she did. Norm reminds Bull firmly that Gemma is his daughter before she's Bull's wife. Bull needs to watch his mouth when talking about her. Bull defends himself, asking if Norm really thinks he has the time and energy to do anything except look after Gemma. But Norm makes his position clear. He's watching Bull closely. Bull sarcastically notes that Norm just said that. Norm repeats his warning. Bull needs to behave himself. Time passes and Bull's life with Gemma continues. One evening, he returns home and makes a devastating discovery. He finds Gary, his close friend and fellow organization member, in bed with his wife, Gemma. Bull's face shows the depth of his betrayal. Gemma panics and runs without saying a word. Bull stands there, his heart shattered. He never imagined being betrayed by both his wife and someone he considered a close friend. But, out of respect for Norm, Bull makes a painful choice. He stays silent about the affair, burying his pain deep inside. He focuses all his energy on raising and caring for his son, Aiden. Days later, Norm calls Bull for a private meeting. During their conversation, Norm reveals that Bull is the only person he fully trusts in the organization. But then he delivers painful news. Since Gemma has chosen to live with Gary, Bull must separate from her. Norm expresses his regret but remains firm. Bull is no longer a member of the group. Bull confronts this decision calmly but firmly. He reveals that he's known about the affair for a long time. He stayed silent out of respect for Norm and his position in the organization. Bull explains that if it weren't for his loyalty to Norm, he would have handled things very differently. He announces he's ready to leave the organization, but only on one condition. He wants custody of his son, Aiden. Norm refuses immediately. He doesn't believe Bull is capable of properly taking care of the boy. Anger and disappointment surge through Bull. He walks away, his heart heavy with rage and hurt over this final betrayal. The next day, Bull returns to his old house to pick up Aiden. Though he's always tough and unyielding with his enemies, he treats his son with special care and tenderness. Soon after their reunion, Bull's former friends Marco and Mike arrive with a message from Norm. They invite Bull and Aiden to join them on a trip to a nearby amusement park. At first, Bull refuses outright. He says he wants to cut all ties with the organization and move on with his life. Touched by his friend's apparent sincerity and wanting Aiden to have a good time, Bull finally agrees to go. At the amusement park, Bull spends time enjoying various rides and attractions with Aiden. Bull and Aiden approach a punching machine. He pays for 2 attempts. He winds up and delivers a powerful punch. The machine registers an impressive score. Aiden is amazed, telling his father he's well hard. Later, Norm finds them and greets Bull warmly. He asks if they've been on the Dodgems yet. Not yet, Bull replies. He asks his associates to take Aiden on another ride. The men take Aiden to the Ferris wheel while Norm and Bull prepare to talk privately. Norm assures Bull not to worry. Nothing is going to happen to Aiden. They board the Ferris wheel together, rising high above the fairground. Norm says they'll sit here for a while and enjoy the view. Once they're at the top, away from prying eyes, Norm's demeanor changes. Bull mentions that Gemma can mess everything up. It's not about Gary, he insists. Norm acknowledges this but reminds Bull that Gemma is his daughter. Bull's face hardens. Bull realizes he's been set up. Bull curses Norm, calling him a traitor. Norm responds that he did ask Bull nicely before. Gary and others are waiting below. They order Bull to get in a vehicle. Bull is furious, calling them all out for their betrayal. Norm warns him not to tempt his patience. He doesn't care who sees. He'll split Bull wide open right here if necessary. They force Bull into a car and drive him to a remote location. An abandoned bus sits in an empty field. Norm orders them to take Bull inside. Gemma suddenly appears, confronting Bull angrily. She accuses him of trying to escape with Aiden. The argument grows heated between them. Norm steps forward and asks Bull a crucial question. If Bull were separated from Aiden, what would he do? Bull's response is cold and direct. If he gets out of this situation, he'll kill every one of them. His ruthless threat makes Norm realize the danger. Bull will never forgive them. He'll never stop hunting them. Not wanting to take that risk, Norm acts first. He orders his men to pour gasoline on the bus. They use a bottle of vodka to knock Bull unconscious, forcing the alcohol down his throat. Bull struggles but eventually passes out. Preparing to carry out their plan, they leave Bull trapped inside the empty bus. Norm gives the order, and someone lights a match. The bus erupts in flames. From a distance, young Aiden crawls out of Gemma's car. He hears the commotion and looks toward the burning bus. When he realizes his father is inside, he screams in horror. Aiden runs toward the flames, crying out for his dad. The boy watches helplessly as the bus burns, convinced his father is dying inside. 10 years pass. The film returns to the present day. Bull has returned from the dead, alive and burning with determination. His quest for revenge has brought him back to destroy everyone who betrayed him. He's already killed Cheryl, Ollie, and Marco. Now he continues hunting the others. Bull's next target is Mike, one of Norm's accomplices. Mike has just picked up his 2 children from school. They're walking home when Mike sees a parked car. His blood runs cold. Bull is sitting inside waiting. In that moment, Mike feels like he's seeing a ghost. Everyone knows Mike was involved in the attempt on Bull's life years ago. Bull steps out of the car. He threatens Mike and orders him to get in. Mike begs for his children's safety. Bull remains cold, demanding to know Gemma's current location. He orders Mike to share any information he has. Confused and terrified, Mike insists he doesn't know where Gemma is. He claims he hasn't seen her in 3 years. Gary and Norm might have better information. Bull gives Mike an ultimatum. If he can arrange for Gary to meet Bull at the fairground, Mike and his children will be safe. If not, Bull threatens to kill them all. Mike desperately agrees to try. He makes the phone call while Bull waits. Eventually, Mike reports that Gary is at the Waltzers. Bull keeps his word and lets Mike and his children go. Bull heads to the fairground and finds Gary. The confrontation is tense. Bull forces Gary onto the Waltzer ride with him. He pays the operator extra money, telling him to spin it as fast as possible. "Don't stop," Bull instructs. The operator agrees enthusiastically. As the ride spins violently, Bull interrogates Gary. Where is Gemma? Gary claims he and Gemma separated not long after Bull's supposed death. He hasn't seen her since. Gary insists he doesn't know where she is. Bull presses harder, demanding the truth. The ride spins faster and faster. Gary finally breaks. He admits Norm often goes to Chartford. Gemma must be there. Bull has his answer. When the ride finally stops, Gary is badly injured from the violent spinning and Bull's brutal interrogation. Bull's search continues. He enters a nightclub and discovers a drug trafficking operation. Remembering that Gemma struggled with severe heroin addiction, Bull intercepts one of the dealers. He forces the terrified man to reveal information about heroin suppliers in the area. The dealer takes Bull to one of the city's top drug suppliers, a man named Dave. Dave lives in a small apartment and seems friendly at first. He offers Bull a drink and talks casually about football and staying fit. But when Bull asks if Gemma is one of his clients, the conversation turns dark. Dave demands payment for the information. Bull agrees but asks for a drink from Dave's bottle first. Dave hands it over. Then Bull suddenly draws a knife and stabs Dave's hand, pinning it to the table. Dave screams in agony. Bull brutally interrogates him, forcing him to reveal more information. After losing his hand, the dealer finally agrees to take Bull to Gemma's house on the condition that his life will be spared. Bull agrees to the terms. The terrified dealer leads him through the streets to a residential area. He points out the last house in the corner. That's where Gemma lives. Bull enters Gemma's house quietly. He finds her asleep, likely under the influence of drugs. He wakes her loudly, startling her into panic. Gemma is shocked to see him alive. She falls to her knees, begging for forgiveness. But Bull remains cold and unmoved. He orders her to call Norm immediately. Gemma has no choice but to comply. Moments later, Norm enters the house carrying a weapon. He's unaware that Bull is hiding inside, waiting with a knife ready. As soon as Norm steps through the door, Bull strikes. In a tense confrontation, Bull quickly overpowers the older man. Once Norm is subdued, Bull presses a pillow against his neck while continuing to demand information from Gemma. Where is Aiden? What happened to their son? Gemma begs Bull to stop hurting her father, but Bull is determined to get the answers he's been seeking for 10 years. In a fit of rage, Bull shouts Aiden's name. Gemma panics completely, realizing Bull won't stop until she tells him everything. Terrified for her own life and her father's, she finally reveals the truth. Aiden is living under the broken bridge downtown. The child they abandoned has been surviving there alone. Bull's patience is completely gone. He's learned what he needed to know. That night, he kills Gemma, eliminating another person responsible for his suffering. Norm is also dealt with. Bull's revenge is nearly complete. The next morning at dawn, Bull goes to the bridge Gemma mentioned. He searches the area beneath it and finds Aiden. The boy is in terrible condition, clearly suffering from years of neglect and drug addiction. Taking Aiden with him, Bull decides to bring him to a nearby church, hoping to save his son's soul, if not his own. At the church, a woman arrives searching for any sign of Bull. This is actually Bull's former mother-in-law. She had divorced Norm years before Aiden was born. When she opens the church door, she's shocked to see young Aiden unconscious on the floor. The sight fills her with fear and suspicion. She confronts Bull, demanding to know what he wants. Bull calmly explains that he seeks salvation, but not for himself. For Aiden, for his son. He wants to give the boy a chance. At redemption, Bull hands her money, asking her to help Aiden get clean from the drugs that have destroyed him. The woman looks into Bull's dark, empty eyes and realizes the terrifying truth. Bull died 10 years ago when Norm and his men burned him alive on that bus. Yet somehow he has returned, driven by an impossible force. Revenge and love for his son have brought him back from death itself. The story ends with the mystery of Bull's impossible return. He was burned alive, but came back. He completed his revenge against everyone who betrayed him, and now he's saved the son who witnessed his death a decade ago.